Deep in a dark corner of your hobby space, we have our failed prints. Prints we made a start on, never got around to finishing. Prints we've run off for testing. Prints we just printed off and never got around to doing anything with. So what I want to do today is take these failed prints, excess prints or leftover parts that you have lying around your hobby shop, very cheaply and easily turn them into something usable that we can use in our hobby, especially if you're a painter. I think you'll love this idea. I'm going to do this on the cheap, using stuff you'll probably find around the home, but the fact that we're all hobbyists here, I'll guarantee you'll find some of this stuff around your hobby shop. Whether you've got a bunch of failed prints, a huge pile of shame in the corner, maybe you got some spare parts from kit bashing, all we need today is some excess parts. We want to focus on some different textures. So I've grabbed mainly my resin prints. I have grabbed a couple of FDM pieces which will come in handy for a little project. So let's go see if we can do something with these. Did have one of my viewers comment, and he was quite happy to see me basically recycle one of my failed prints that I had. Again, happened to be quite a large piece. It failed and missed this huge gap in the middle here. This is a little bit above my modelling pay grade, so I did print it again. On the second print, it had another fail. Luckily for me, it was on a piece that had printed on this, so with a little bit of cutting and recycling, I was able to patch the second fail with this one, resulting in one good piece. And whilst looking at this nice textured bit of feathers, it did get me thinking about some options to reuse some of these failed pieces. So one of the first things you might ask yourself is, why the hell have I got so many failed prints? Well, I've been printing for about 3 years now. Some of these prints are obvious fails. Something's gone wrong with the print job halfway through and you end up with half a model and half of it sliced off. Some of the fails aren't necessarily fails, they're test prints that I've printed off while trying a new resin. There's definitely a chance when you're trying a new resin that it's going to fail while you're dialing in those settings, change of season. And there's a number of reasons why your prints might fail. One of the first things you want to do is to try to make the most of them. If you can recover a failed print, awesome. One of the very first models that I printed off while I was still learning my settings on the resin printer was this Captain America zombie bust. You can tell I was still learning, the whole thing's printed solid. So I used a hell of a lot more resin than I probably needed to. This was before I learned about hollowing prints. Because of the weight being printed solid, you can see here we've ended up with a fail right on this headpiece. You can see it for miles. But my thoughts were, it looks like a little bit of battle damage. This is when I was learning to paint as well. I needed the practice. All in all, managed to save the print and a whole lot of resin. So personally, I've been keeping my failed prints since I started in the hobby. Dreams of doing something with them at some stage, maybe using them for painting practice. One of the other main places you might end up with some failed prints, both on FDM and resin, is when getting used to using your own support settings. Generating your own supports onto the models. This can take a little bit of practice, and if you don't get it right, you're going to end up with failed prints. So with all my hoarding and saving useless models for a rainy day, today is that rainy day. Right, let's see what we're working with here. I have an assortment of models, 32mm, 75mm, statue piece, big resin models, some FDM, FDM trial print, some broken models that I've never got around to painting, some misprints here. Good selection of textures and models that we can do something with. So what do we need for this? Pretty simple. I'm pretty sure you'll find these around your hobby space. So for ease, electric Dremel with a cutting blade. Of course, if you don't have that, trusty hacksaw will do the job. If you're working with 3D models, I guarantee you've got some super glue or some type of adhesive around. I'm going to give this a go with some hot glue today. Basically, what we wanted to do today is turn this pile of junk into a texture palette. Once this is turned into a texture palette, I'm going to use the lid of my container. That way we can place this over, close it up, it won't get broken, and we'll have that as our texture palette. If you're not too sure what I mean by a texture palette, follow along. I'll show you at the end once it's completed and exactly what we can use it for. What I'm looking for here is a mix of textures. I would like to incorporate a little bit of FDM just to help me if I want to be testing some FDM style paint. So I have a few FDM bits there that I want to incorporate in. And then some definite textures. So feathers are a big one for dry brushing. Great use for the palette texture. I definitely want some feathers. I think this model here will give us some really good textures. See what we can do with that. These are of course some of the trial benchies print. So I'm going to stop the video here for a second. I'm going to go chop up some of these pieces outside, especially some of the resin ones, just so I don't get the dust everywhere over my camera and in my lungs. Once I've got some of these chopped up, I'll come back, talk through some of the textures, and we'll look at placing them and getting these down onto the palette. So it's a good thing we did that outside. As you can see, there's a layer of dust everywhere already. What I've done here is arrange them out roughly how I want to glue this down, representing quite a few different textures. Got some FDM stuff in here, got some resin. So just waiting for the heat gun to heat up. And you can tell it's been a while since I've used the heat gun. These are normally white clear, not yellow tint, but I'm pretty sure they'll still work. Just remove these for now. Let's make a start here. So what I've tried to go for here is an assortment of some feather types. Great for dry brushing, of course. A little bit of foliage here on these trees, as well as some brickwork. So definitely some fauna, feathers, brickwork masonry. Now I've got some robes exposed at the back. So all in all, some good textures there. What I'm going to do now is just line a couple along the back. That leaves room for this to sit in here. Here. Fit snugly in there. Tried to do is pile some big stuff around the back here. So it's removed, I can get in with my brush for all these details, work around it, and still pass my hand over this back corner. So if this is in place, I can still sort of get my brush in hand over everything. These ones here, this tail texture, easily accessible with my brush. A bit of FDM. Terrain piece. Yeah, really just trying to get a mix of textures. I don't have these glued on, they seem to be holding. So I'm just going to run some waves, basically. Hopefully that will dry on there. Yeah, gonna have this separate, have that off somewhere. We can use that just to dry off the dry brush, potentially, just as a bit of a different texture for the colour. And I have to give all this a blow, put the top over. One final step that remains now is to get some spray paint on it. So I've managed to get some primer all over the palette. Now it's looking a little bit more usable, as I've tried with this palette to make it a blend of textures and miscellaneous parts. So one of the main reasons I wanted to make this palette was for dry brushing. So I've got my textured piece here, which is just basically the hot glue. So I can brush off that remaining excess from my dry brush on the texture on the palette here, and then we can do a final test on any of these dry brushable textures before we actually apply it to the model we're working on. I've tried to get an assortment here of things you'd normally dry brush. A couple of types of feathers, some of the broccoli type foliage on the trees. I do have a robe and some whatnot on the little princess, some flowers. I've got some brickwork on the castle. So that's one of the first easy uses of the texture. The other is as you're painting your models, wiping off the excess onto one of the textures. And then as you go through the painting process and you might want to try a new colour to see how it contrasts against it, then we have something we can try the two colours on before we apply it to the actual model we're working on. One thing I've found with all of my army painted paints is it can be a little bit tricky sometimes telling the exact colour you're going to get once it's applied to the model versus how it looks on a wet palette. Which is also one of the reasons I wanted some models with details on them. So we've got some metalwork detail, and we've got this frog with some flames and some fur. I've got a chain here. Using these details, again, we can just test colours before we apply them to an actual model we're painting. At the very start of a model, it doesn't matter too much. It's very easy if you make a wrong decision on the base colour to just go over that again. It gets a little bit trickier as you progress through the model and you've put in a few hours into painting. You start getting a little bit touchy about trying new things. This just gives an opportunity to try a wash or a speed paint before applying it to a model you've already sunk 40 hours into. Also tried with the palette to just use a couple of different primers. I've got black primer on there, I've got some grey primer, and done a slight zenithal coat to some of the models as well. So something like this can be made very cheap. You know, if you didn't want to sacrifice a Tupperware container, this is just an old terrain piece that I've glued everything onto. So you know, this could be the palette itself. You don't necessarily need the Tupperware container, obviously. It's one thing I still haven't figured out is a good use for the support material, both from FDM and resin. So I'd love to hear what you guys are doing with your supports. So let me know in the comments. So if you like the video, hit the like button. If you like this sort of content, maybe hit the subscribe, it would help me out heaps. And if you want to avoid any more failed prints in the future, check out this video where we take a look at slicing and printing 3D files on a resin printer. Catch you next time.